Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about how General Motors managed to win the car sales war in the US market. They were the biggest automaker in 2024 and by a pretty considerable margin, and so let's get into it. Let's start things off by going over these sales figures to put into perspective how well General Motors did in the US market. So they sold just under 2.7 million vehicles. Now this is in a sales year where we're right around that like 15 million unit range. And so that's pretty impressive. Like they had a lot of the US market share. Toyota and Ford, also very large automakers that both compete directly with General Motors in terms of product, we're right around the 2 million unit mark. So this shows you again just how well General Motors did in the US market. And now let's talk about how they were able to pull this off. So the first thing that helped out General Motors when it comes to dominating in the US market is pricing. So I did mention that General Motors does compete against Toyota and Ford, but really General Motors' biggest competition in the US market is going to be Ford and Stellantis, and it just comes down to cross-shopping. Some people are going to cross-shop GM product with Toyotas, but you're going to see way more cross-shopping with Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. I mean, how many people do you know that are constantly debating if they should rock a Ford or if they should rock a Ram or if they should rock a Chevy, right? It's always a debate that is happening. And Ford and Stellantis shot themselves in the foot when it comes to pricing, and this allowed General Motors to really dominate. And what this looks like is Ford and Stellantis increased their prices by a much larger margin compared to what General Motors did. Let's look at a few different vehicles in their lineups to emphasize this. So first off, sub $30,000. I don't think Stellantis has any car in the US market at this point that is under $30,000. And so that is a market that they no longer have access to. Pretty much all their stuff is $30,000 and above. Ford had a really good product in the sub $30,000 range. It was the Ford Maverick. But Ford decided to massively increase the price. I mean, you used to be able to get a base model Maverick for just over $20,000, and now a base model Maverick's like $30,000. Huge price increase, and I mean, you look at it percentage-wise, and that is absolutely enormous. General Motors, on the other hand, has, not a ton of vehicles in this price range, but they've got some solid offerings. Good example is the new Chevy Trax and its sibling vehicle, the Buick Envista. When you look at this vehicle, it is a solid, affordable, little kind of like hatchback, somewhat of a crossover, front-wheel drive. It's an interesting car, but they didn't do any sort of crazy price increases. They released it with its initial pricing. It's kind of in the mid $20,000 range, and they've just kept it there. And if you look at the trucks, which is a huge volume seller for all of these automakers, a fully loaded Chevy Silverado 1500 High Country, it's about $70,000, not cheap by any means, but it competes against a Ram 1500 Limited and a Ford F-150 Platinum Plus. Both of those trucks, the Ram and the Ford, are over $80,000. So they're over $10,000 more expensive than the Chevy equivalent. And so those automakers, to be similar in price, have to discount their trucks $10,000. And then if a Chevy dealership decides to throw some discount on a Silverado High Country, then they're going to be even lower compared to the Ram and the Ford equivalent. And so I think you guys can see at this point that General Motors wasn't as greedy as Ford and Stellantis, their two biggest competitors in the US market. And it's not to say that some of their product is not expensive. They definitely have very expensive cars, like the new Hummer EV, cars from the Cadillac brands, the Corvettes. But because they were incremental with their price increases and because they were always competitive within the segments that they are in when it comes to pricing, it made it so that when buyers went and shopped and cross-shopped, that they saw that, well, I'm getting similar features with the GM product, or I'm getting more features and it's either the same amount of money with more features, or it's similar features and it's less money. And so the value for buyers was definitely there. Now, the next thing that really helps out General Motors is having a huge lineup of cars. And to really show how well General Motors has done with this, let's compare their lineups to their two competitors, biggest competitors, Ford and Stellantis. So Ford basically has some economy cars, they've got some crossovers, they've got bigger SUVs, they've got pickup trucks. You've got, again, the Maverick, which is kind of like a more affordable pickup truck thing. You got the Mustang, so they have a sports car in the lineup, and then Lincoln's just basically luxury. So Ford has a pretty broad lineup, and then you go over to Stellantis, and they also have a pretty broad lineup for the most part. I mean, Chrysler basically sells minivans, Jeep, SUVs. They're trying to be luxury, but yeah, they're not doing too well with that. And then Ram sells trucks, and then Dodge was muscle cars, but who knows what's going to happen with that moving forward. And then they also have the Durango, so they have an SUV. So again, decently broad lineup, but they're kind of lacking on the luxury side. They're trying, not really able to do that. General Motors, if you look at just the Chevy brand alone, the lineup, you have a sports car, right? The Corvette, and it has entry level, and it's got all the way up to like a supercar, right? You've got the Z06 and the ZR1. So if someone's looking for like a crazy top line sports car, they can get it from the same brand as they can get an entry level sports car that still has crazy performance. They also have the Chevy Trax that I just talked about earlier. Super affordable car, but then they also have crazy loaded up Silverado, high country, big truck. You also have the Suburban and the Tahoe. So they just have a really broad lineup just within one brand. Again, Buick is always a little bit of an oddball when it comes to General Motors, but you basically have a bunch of different crossovers within the Buick brand. And then GMC, right, it's all SUVs and trucks, but you have nicer SUVs and trucks than what you have in Chevy. And it's kind of like this bridge, right? Because I would consider it luxury, but it's not Cadillac luxury, right? And so GMC gives you a nicer product than what you have with Chevy. And so they have basically Chevy, which is your normal stuff, which with some premium products. And then I would say GMC is kind of like premium plus. And then you have Cadillac, which is full-on luxury, but they also have some exciting sports cars as well, right? You've got the CT4 and CT5 V Blackwings, and then you've got the Escalade V as well. And again, if you look at the range, there is just so many cars for buyers to get. I mean, look at it this way. Let's say that you want to only buy from one brand. You try to do this with Ford. Well, let's say you want a high-end sports car. They don't make the Ford GT anymore, right? So Ford has made some cool stuff, but it's always kind of hard to get. They don't make all that many of them. And so you're basically stuck with the Mustang, which is a good car, but that's all you have there. And then let's say that you want a big full-size SUV. Well, they've got the Expedition and they have the Navigator. They don't really have an in-between, right? I think you guys kind of get the point that I'm making here. And you do the same thing with Stellantis, and it's a similar outcome. Whereas you look at General Motors, and it's like you could have a Chevy Trax for your kid. Your wife could be driving a GMC Yukon, and then you could be driving a Silverado diesel truck, and then you could also have a Chevy Corvette Z06 if you were, again, this would obviously be a very expensive garage to own, but then you could even have it be a lot less expensive, right? You could just have a base model Corvette, you could have a work truck that you use for business, and then let's say your wife drives an Equinox, and then again, your kid, we'll just use the Chevy Trax in this example. I think you guys get the point, right? They just have a really broad lineup. There's a bunch of cars for a bunch of different people. And so people are able to stay within the brand and still get what they want, even if their needs change over time. So that is something that definitely helps them out in the US market that their two biggest competitors haven't been able to really fulfill. They've been attempting. Again, Ford has attempted to dive into the luxury segment with Lincoln, and it's had some success. Not nearly as much as GM with the Cadillac brand. And then Jeep, right? They're trying to do the luxury thing. They haven't had success there. If those two automakers could dive a little bit deeper in the luxury side of things, it would help them out a bit. And then obviously sports cars, it's a small part of the market, but it's still kind of an important part for certain people. Now this leads us to the last point, the thing that also helped General Motors win in today's market, and that is mediocrity, believe it or not. And here's what I mean by this point. If you look at Stellantis and if you look at Ford, the number one competitors, they are focusing so heavily on their top of the line product, and they're focusing on making their product as exciting as possible. And they've forgotten about some of the more boring stuff associated with cars that regular buyers value a massive amount, and why regular buyers are choosing General Motors over Ford or Stellantis or even Toyota at this point. And so here's the things. Regular boring features that make everyday use better. A good example is a 360 camera. If you look at a lot of product from General Motors, A lot of the product has a 360 camera as standard equipment, or it's part of a package that is relatively affordable to add. Like, it's easy to add a 360 camera to most of the lineup within the General Motors brands. And this is something that, again, is not exciting whatsoever, but people really value because it makes parking a whole lot easier. Another one is the new camera rear view mirror. If you look at the General Motors lineup, a lot of their product has that available as an option. Again, it's very easy to add. It's a silly thing, right? It just makes it so that you have a camera on the back of the car and it's there on the rear view mirror. But if you're in a Suburban, for example, it's a really nice feature, even a pickup truck as well, right? So it's not as exciting as a supercharged V8 that's in a Ford Raptor R, but it's something that regular people really value. And so when you look across the GM lineup, you'll notice a lot of these features are either standard equipment or they're easy to add, right? It doesn't make the car insanely expensive. And so it adds value to an average buyer that the other automakers aren't offering. Like Ford doesn't even offer a camera rear view mirror on their pickup trucks, for example. And then if you look at Ram, they do offer a camera rear view mirror and they also offer a 360 camera. But if you go to a Ram dealership, a lot of their vehicles won't have it. You have to add it as an additional package that's extremely expensive, that makes the vehicle a lot more expensive. I mean, a good example is the fully loaded trucks. A Silverado High Country, again, it's about $70,000, a little bit more than that, depending on the engine and everything. That has a 360 camera, that has a camera rear view mirror as standard equipment, if I remember right. Ram, on the other hand, makes you add all these expensive packages to their Limited to where you're well over $80,000 to have the same features that the Chevy has. So again, you look at your average buyer and they go, I can get this really nice luxury truck with these features that I really enjoy that make like actual day-to-day driving better, right? How many times do you use your camera system? How many times do you use the camera rear view mirror as well? So I think you guys get the point there. Chevy added a bunch of features that aren't super exciting to their cars, but they made it so that they were accessible across the lineup. And this created value to regular people, whereas their competitors, and this includes Toyota, are so heavily focused on making their cars as exciting as possible. I mean, Stellantis, for example, they have so many cars with a passenger screen. Like, you can get into a fully loaded Stellantis car and it'll have a passenger screen, but it won't have a 360 camera. The money and the value is in the wrong place with some of these automakers. And so mediocrity, right? It really did help out General Motors, right? Not focusing on the top of the line, and they do have really cool top of the line product, but really focusing on the normal average product made it so that they outsold all of their competition by a very large margin. Let me know what you guys think about this situation, and let me know if you agree with my points on General Motors winning in the US market. Do you think that there is something that I missed, or if there is something that was in here that didn't really sway the market? I'll see you.